Times have changed, yeah.
Hi, Mr. Mayor, how are you?
I had it here, it's friendly, you know, by and large, not completely, but by and large.
Nobody
Mr. Mayor, can I have you
All right.
Yeah.
Like the good old times.
Heavy seconds.
Sorry?
Yeah, thanks for knowing, yeah. How have you been, how are you feeling these days?
Jake, I'm vertical.
Vertical, that's good.
Some days better than most.
Mary, do we have a script? Are we doing a script tonight?
Not that I know.
I just saw it on the, I hadn't written it down.
That's okay, that's okay. I have a general idea.
Looks like there's a tie.
Good evening. The hour of 6:30 PM having arrived, I will call to order this regular meeting of the Joint Planning Board and Planning Licenses and Development Committee. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting material will find it on the city website. If you are in our audience tonight, you may access the agenda from any mobile device. Copies of the printed agenda are available in the wall pocket just as you enter the meeting room. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the home page and subscribe to the city meetings email list. The public and other board members will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda items under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room and identify themselves by name and address prior to speaking. Will staff please conduct the roll?
For PLD, Kate Bosley,
Here.
Phil Jones,
Here.
Bobby Williams,
Here.
Ed Haas,
Here.
Andrew Madison. For the Planning Board, Harold Farrington,
Here.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Here.
Mayor Jay Khan,
Present.
Counselor Mike Remy, Sarah Vizani, Ryan Clancy, Kenneth Cost, Armando Rangel,
Here.
and for the alternates, Stefan Mayu, Randon Markelin,
Here.
and Tammy Adams, Michael Hafer.
Great, thank you. Do we need to seat an alternate?
I believe so, thank you. If that's my prerogative this evening, Mary, I would like to invite Ms. Marklin to be a voting member for this evening.
Do we have that noted? Great. And I also believe that Counselor Remy will be joining us via Zoom this evening?
I believe so. I don't see him on the meeting yet.
Okay, so withstanding any objection, I'm going to allow that when he joins us. I will just find out his reason for remote participation and if there's anyone with him. But we will save that until he can make himself available. All right, so our first item on our agenda tonight is the approval of meeting minutes from October 15th, 2024. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Motion by Counselor Jones, second by Counselor Haas. Any questions on that motion? Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
And that is unanimous. All right, our item 3 on our agenda this evening, there are 2 public workshops. I'm going to open and close them both individually. The first one is for ordinance O-2024-17 relative to minimum lot size in the high density, medium density, and downtown transition districts. Petitioner, City of Keene Community Development Department, proposes to amend section 3.5.2, sections 3.6.2, and sections 4.6.1 of the Land Development Code to remove the minimum lot area requirements for each dwelling unit after the first dwelling unit in the high density, medium density, and downtown transition districts. Do we have a presentation from staff?
Yes, Madam Chair, Mary Brenner, Senior Planner. If you'll just give me a moment, I'm going to pull up some presentation slides to give you some backgrounds. Are the screens on? Oh, yes, they are. Great. Great. So thank you. If this committee recalls, we've discussed this idea a few times in the past as a way to remove barriers to incremental sort of infill development within some of the more built-out areas of the city. When we've discussed it in the past, it's been within the context of mostly the medium density and high density zoning districts, which are both residential zoning districts. When staff was working on the ordinance and doing a review of the districts within the city where we have that residential density factor, we identified a third district, which is the downtown transition district, formerly the office district, which also had that density factor within it. So tonight, I'm just going to give an overview of the ordinance, what we're proposing in those three districts, and then open it up for questions. As a reminder, at the workshop stage of the ordinance, and also for the benefit of those in the audience, the workshop phase is really the phase where that's intended to be more of a workshop where you can work on the actual ordinance and make changes before sending it through the formal public hearing process. So we're starting with this as our starting point, and would love to hear any suggestions or ideas that you have. So the basic proposal is to remove the density factor within those three districts that I mentioned, which are shown here on the screen. We have in green is high density. So that's the area where you can have multifamily residential. In orange is medium density, where you can have up to 3 units, 3 residential dwelling units on a single lot. And then in yellow is downtown transition. And that is a district that's intended to transition from the more intense downtown uses to the less intense residential uses. So that district includes a mix of residential and then office and other really low intensity uses, such as open space.
Mary, can you make that expand? Like, can you zoom into that? for us?
Yeah, so for each district, I'm not sure why it's not full screen on your screens, but for each district, I do have a map that kind of zooms in a bit. Is that better?
It's a little better, yes.
Okay, well, so this is the medium density district. This district has roughly, this is all rough based on assessing data, and we had to clean it up a bit. So these numbers are approximate. But we identified 764 parcels of land. So if there was a condoized property, we counted that as one parcel. Each one of those parcels is limited to 3 dwelling units per lot by zoning. And the way it works is the minimum lot size in this district is 8,000 square feet for any use. But if it's a residential use and you have more than one residential unit, each additional residential unit requires 5,400 additional square feet. So even if you have a large house and you're just doing an internal conversion and you're not actually adding onto the house at all or building an addition, you still today would need an extra 5,400 square feet added onto your lot in order to be able to do that without having to go to the zoning board of adjustment for a variance. And so that's where we've been, we've received inquiries, people that want to do just that, make some internal conversions, but then they would have to go get a variance, and so they stop there. So this is trying to address that barrier. When we were doing our analysis of the parcels in this district, based on our current residential lot size requirements, almost half of them, or 47%, are currently non-conforming, which is a lot. However, we just simply, if you choose to do this and remove the density factor, but keep the base minimum lot size at 8,000 square feet, that would reduce it to 30% being non-conforming. Now, our analysis of this data didn't go so far as looking up whether each individual lot had any variances or anything to allow that. So some of those might be legally non-conforming, but, so this is just a very basic analysis. And then in terms of the existing land uses, the majority of parcels in this district are currently single-family, 61%. About a quarter are two-family, 8% are multifamily, 1% are non-residential, and about 5% are vacant. So just to give you an idea of the way that properties in that district are currently being used. So the next one is the high-density district. This is our most intense residential district. This district includes all of the Keene State College campus, so we counted the whole campus property as one property for this analysis. So if you include condos, it's a much higher number of properties, but if we're just looking at parcels of land, it's about 537. Now, this zoning district doesn't have a cap on the number of units. However, the base or the minimum lot area is 6,000 square feet, and then each additional dwelling unit after the first one would require an extra 5,000 square feet. So really the limiting factor on the number of units is currently the land area of the lot. And these are really in what is supposed to be the most densely developed part of the city for a purely residential district. Again, about half or 49% of the lots are currently non-conforming with respect to lot size. After this proposed change, if it goes through and the minimum lot area is just set at 6,000 square feet, that would go down to 20%. In terms of uses, single family is still the most common use at 39%. Two-family, again, is about a quarter. Multifamily is 23%. 6% is non-residential. So that includes like schools, the college, municipal facilities, things like that, as well as commercial uses that are just legally non-conforming. And then 7% of the parcels are vacant. All right, and so the last one is downtown transition. So this is by far the smallest district. It only has about 96 parcels of land. This district is adjacent to the downtown districts on one side, and also residential districts, including low density, residential preservation, and high density. There's currently no limit to the number of dwelling units per lot. Again, it has actually the same requirements as the medium density district with respect to lot size. It's an 8,000 square foot minimum lot size. You need an additional 5,400 square feet for each additional unit beyond the first, if it's a residential use. And about 60% of the parcels in this district are currently non-conforming with the current lot size requirements. If that density factor is removed, that would go down to 30%. And then this district also has the widest variety of uses. There is, I think single family is that 15%, two family is about 19%, multifamily is 28%, 31% non-residential, and then there's about 5% mixed use and 2% of them are vacant. All right, so that was actually all I had for my presentation. I'll leave it up in case we want to go back to any of the slides. But I hope that kind of gave you a sense of what the districts currently look like on the ground. I did try to do like a pseudo impact analysis to kind of go through the data and try and figure out before and after this change what the development potential could be. It was a little bit tricky with the data that I had, but what I basically saw was about a doubling of the number of units that could be built in the medium density district. With high density, it wasn't really feasible to do that sort of a build-out analysis, so I didn't want to include that on here. But in case you're wondering what the impact would be, it's hard to suss out, but I think it would be probably about a doubling of the opportunity that's there today. So I don't think that this would result in a bunch of properties coming in and all of a sudden building a bunch of units, but we might see like somebody coming in who wants to add a third unit to their 2 unit or a 4th unit to their 3 unit, something like that. We're not proposing to change any of the other requirements in zoning, so impervious coverage, setbacks, all of that, height limitations, all of that would still remain. So those would be what would control the density rather than the density factor if this proposal goes through. Happy to answer any questions.
So before we turn it over for questions, I just want to remind the committee, we do have members of the public that I think are going to want to speak tonight. So if we have questions for staff, that's great, but we're going to keep the deliberation until after the public speaks. Does anyone have any questions for Mary? Counselor Jones?
Thank you. Mary, I think some of these districts, just quick looking at the maps you showed, I think some of them have existing ERZ zones, and some might have TIF districts that still exist, which might be incentive for development. Do we know what parts those are?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I know that the city has a few different TIF districts, some of which are inactive and some of which I think are still active. I think
The gentleman who wrote it is sitting behind you.
yes. Med Kupczynski is here tonight, who would be better able to answer that question.
Go ahead, Med.
There's 3 or 4 TIF districts, if I remember correctly. Most of them are in what we consider the downtown, mostly. If it's an item that the council or the committee wants to expand and take a look at, the mapping's pretty easy to pull up out of our tax assessor's office and compare them. The ERZ, at least if we're talking about the same thing, is economic recovery money.
I'm sorry, did I say ERZ? I meant to say 79E.
79E, okay.
I'm sorry.
Different. 79E mostly is what we would consider the traditional downtown and then down Marlborough Street. Although there's been discussions about expanding it, you know, the 79E that we have right now, and as a matter of fact, I'll be bringing forward, as soon as I can figure out the right path of travel through the city clerk's office and the city attorney's office, a change in the map that's actually with the 79E resolution. It still refers to the old downtown as opposed to the new downtown. But it's an opportunity to begin a conversation about expanding the traditional 79E district, which is related to what we consider downtown. And then there's also 2 other sections of 79E that the city has never adopted. And I want to have a conversation with the council about whether or not they want to adopt them. One of which is a rehabilitation use of 79E. The other is a housing opportunity zone, what they call a housing opportunity zone, where for brand new housing you can use 79E, regardless of it being in the downtown. Okay.
Great.
Madam Chair, I brought that up because in the future, we might be able to marry these 2 together.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds
Thank you.
great. I'm excited to see the changes that we could potentially have for 79E. I've looked into that personally. Yes, Councilor Haas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quick, for some newbies, what's a 79E? I know everybody knows what a TIF is, I think, but a 79E, that's a new one on me.
Mary, do you want to field that one? Or do you-
It's called the Community Revitalization, it's a tax program.
Yeah, so it allows the city council to, an applicant would apply for 79E relief, And basically, it would freeze the tax assessment for that parcel to before a project gets finalized. And then there's a certain amount of time that that freeze is allowed to remain. And then eventually, the parcel will catch back up to current assessment based on the improvements. But that period of relief can be used as part of a pro forma to make a project more financially viable.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe that the program allows you to create stipulations around what you're asking for and what the council's willing to approve. Mayor?
It's a state statute, 79E. Yeah, and the period of time is 5 years. In some instances, can be extended to 10.
10, yep. Great.
But that's a municipal decision.
Matt?
That sounded like a question. I'm trying to remember it from rote, and I can't remember from rote. I think the actual first term can be up to 7 years, and there's ways of extending it even beyond that. And what gets confusing is when you get into 79E, E4, and E4B and E4C, which is the housing rehabilitation and the housing new opportunity zone, the extensions can be even greater. But it's completely within the control of the council. You know, they make a proposition to the council. They have to prove certain things based on our adoption, our resolution. The council then hears that testimony, makes a decision as to whether or not they want to agree with what the proposal is and set whatever standards they want. But, you know, Evan basically outlined it correctly, which is it's an opportunity for a housing stimulus, or in the case of the rehabilitation portion, if we adopt it, rehabbing buildings to get to a kind of a greater good, realizing that those buildings, after you've added units or rehabilitated them, down the road will have a higher value from the standpoint of taxes, and you get your return that way.
Great, thank you.
I didn't come here to
Michael?
talk, you know.
I'm sorry.
You're sitting in the audience.
I wanted to ask Mary this question. So for the medium density, let's take that one for instance, eliminating the portion of 5,000 square feet for an additional unit. It seems like that's of two varieties, and I guess I just want to see if that's worth parsing out, meaning a two-story unit that might be converted to a third story or a third unit within an existing footprint is one instance where that might apply. Another instance where that might apply is, for instance, a two-story building that added an ADU. Is that correct?
Yes, if, so when you say two-story building, do you mean a two-unit building?
Two-unit in one footprint.
Yes, I'm trying to remember, there might be a limitation on whether or not you can have more than one residential building per lot in that district, so that would be,
Can a two-unit building add an ADU?
no.
So that answers that question.
Yeah, but you could have up to 3 units in the medium density. What I'm not sure of off the top of my head is
If it can
whether
be
you could have them
detached.
be, you could have more than one building. So having like 2 units in one building and the third unit in a completely separate structure, I don't think that's allowed, and Evan's shaking his head and he's looking at the code, so.
Evan?
So it's Evan Clements, planner. I apologize earlier for not introducing myself. So I'm just going to read our definition for dwelling multifamily. A structure containing 3 or more dwelling units located on a single lot with dwelling units either stacked or attached horizontally, which is designed, occupied, or intended for the occupancy of 3 or more separate families. So our definition for multifamily pretty clearly says that it's got to be one building. So to have a duplex within a detached third unit would not meet our definition for dwelling multifamily.
Right. And although we allow detached ADUs, you cannot add an ADU to a two-family building.
That is correct. ADUs are exclusively for a single family.
Yes. Anyone else? Okay. So at this time, I am going to open this up to public comment. This is not a formal public hearing. I would invite members of the public to offer comments or questions on the proposed ordinance. Please join me at the microphone and state your name and address for the minute taker. Do we have anyone that wishes to speak tonight? Come on up.
Josh Meehan, 65 Langley Road, Keene, New Hampshire. Real general comment, just one of encouragement. I think as everybody here knows, our housing crisis continues to be pretty profound for people at all incomes. Everybody's kind of stuck. For those of you who don't know, I work at Keene Housing. And so we see one segment of the market looking for places to live. And I'm just thankful to the city staff for working so hard to try and find ways for us to be able to infill where we can, to think creatively about opportunities to build more housing that we need so very desperately in our community. So nothing too specific, a general thank you and words of encouragement.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name is Tom Savastano. My address is 75 Winter Street in Keene. So I think that I'm in process of still learning about this, and about different aspects of it. I had some concerns that I hope will be addressed, in the discussion that you folks have, together. My first concern, I'm in the downtown transition district, and I support allowing ADUs within certain guidelines and also have some questions and concerns. My first concern regards the look and feel of ADUs within Keene's older neighborhoods. From Keene's Land Code Amendment, is it O-2306 or 0-2306, whatever, related to ADUs? I see the following highlights, that ADUs must be under the same ownership as the primary lot. They can be either attached or detached. They cannot exceed 1,000 square feet of floor space. There's only one parking space is required for an ADU, and they're subject to the district's dimensions, siting, build-out, and height restrictions, and cannot be closer than 10 feet to the property line.
So, Tom, I just
Yep.
want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yep.
So the ordinance that we're talking about
Mhm.
is not specific to ADUs. Are you clear on that?
Okay, but what do you mean specifically?
So I think that there is some confusion. I think that
Mhm.
we've heard the term ADU mentioned already tonight. And so I want to point out that, and Mary, please jump in if I'm misspeaking, but this change is not related to an ADU. I think you just read very clearly what the requirements for ADUs are, and ADUs require that it be owner occupied, the dwelling could be detached, which is very different than what we're talking about here. This could be a single family home that adds a second unit. It would not need to be owner occupied, and the unit would need to be attached. So it could be a two-family home that was adding a third unit, which would change it from a duplex to a multifamily. And those rules are separate in the code from ADU rules. So I just want to make sure that you're clear that some of the things that you're outlining wouldn't necessarily apply to the changes that could happen if this ordinance is adopted.
So the ordinance is related to ADUs or is not?
This current ordinance that's before us for discussion tonight is not related to ADUs.
Okay, but it is related to
It's really-
size of
It's related to the
lot size.
addition of, the potential addition of new units
Right.
to current buildings. So an ADU would be a single-family home that's owner-occupied, allowing for a second unit, whether attached or detached, for additional income or a family member or something under
Yeah, right.
those circumstances.
Yeah.
this would be allowing that single-family home to be converted to a two-family home, or a two-family home to be converted to a multifamily home by going from a duplex to a 3-unit building, or a 3-unit building to a 4-unit building, as Mary
Okay.
mentioned before, which does not require that any of those units on that property be occupied by the owner, but they would have to, much differently than an ADU, be attached together. There wouldn't be allowed to be like cottages built on the property.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
one thing, so in the high-density and medium-density districts, because those are residential districts, you can only have one primary use per lot.
Okay.
Downtown transition is not categorized as a residential district, so in the instance of the downtown transition, you can have multiple buildings on a lot.
So you could have an additional detached unit.
Yes, you could
Okay.
have multiple buildings. It could be, 2 duplexes, for example. So that is something, if the board wants to limit that in downtown transition, we could
Discuss
include
it.
that, yeah,
Okay.
discuss it.
In that case, I'll pass over one section of my comments, but I'd like to read on.
Yes, please,
Okay.
keep going.
So one of the things I'm concerned about is well, a few things I'm concerned about. I mean, what is considered a look of ADUs that fits within like historic neighborhoods is certainly one, and especially if it's in the downtown transition district and it relates to separate buildings. I mean, I think that that's something that really should be addressed. I don't see a reference to the historic district in these documents. I'm also concerned about unintended results of changing the minimum lot size within the downtown, for ADUs, within the downtown transition district. Downtown transition is considered a low-intensity district that helps the city's appearance flow from downtown to residential. That low intensity is what its residents have advocated for years in city council meetings and also before PLD. We've wanted to preserve the look and feel of the neighborhood and accordingly maintain property values. Looking at the minutes for the last PLD meeting, which were approved earlier, line 171, the downtown transition district was described by staff as the same scheme as medium and high-density districts, without any real justification. But I don't see it as the same scheme, and I don't think that applies. What currently protects the downtown transition's low-density usage is the minimum lot size requirements for additional dwelling units, which this proposal would drastically reduce. And I also want to point out what I see as an inconsistency, which you brought up, Mary, in your slides, just in terms of your presentation. You brought up that medium density district has a limit of 3 dwelling units per lot. And that would remain in place with the proposed change. From what I read of the land use code, however, there is no similar stipulation for the downtown transition district, even though it also allows multifamily dwellings, but is a lower density district. So that means that medium density is limited to 3 units. Downtown transition does not have such a limitation, yet it's considered a low intensity usage rather than medium or high density. So that's something that I think that most folks in downtown transition district would have advocated, as I said, for low intensity for years. I think that enacting this change in lot sizes for ADUs could unintentionally position the low density downtown transition district to become actually higher density than the medium density district. My request is that the city council and this board consider dropping the downtown transition district from this proposal so that the minimum lot sizes will remain in place there and the historic look and feel of the district is maintained. And that ADUs still be permitted there, but under those guidelines. If the minimum lot sizes are changed, then I think at a minimum, the low-density downtown transition district should have the same limitation of 3 dwelling units that the medium density currently has. So that's what my comments are. Does anyone have any questions?
No, great, thank you for your comments.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, come on up.
I'm not gonna, my name is Peter SPF.
Hi,
I live
Peter.
on Middle Street, and we think we've got a historic district there. We'd like to leave it that way. Everything he says is what I say. And if you're gonna change it, you're gonna create an awful conflagration for us. We don't want it. That's all.
Great, thank you, Peter. Med?
Yeah, I didn't come to advocate for anything. I'm just here to observe in a way. You know, what I've been asked to do is look at opportunities for housing in general in the city. So I'm interested in anything that could increase housing. I've been involved with zoning in the enforcement side of zoning since 1983 around the country, different places. And when you have a zoning code that has this many nonconformities in it, there's a reason, you know, there's something going on. And I think the reason, and this is common, I think, in the older communities in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, et cetera, you have an imposition of zoning on top of an existing land pattern, right? So a lot of these areas and a lot of these districts were settled out, roadways, they were settled out from the standpoint of the structures and things like that before zoning was effective, or between zoning code changes and, you know, the different things that have gone on through time as we've tried to beautify the city or resolve the city, et cetera, et cetera. You know, if you've got I was actually shocked when I came here and I looked at medium density, I did some sampling on it, at how much of medium density was non-conforming, right? And what does that mean and what do we do about it? Well, I think you have an opportunity, at least with medium density, to do something about that, and high density to do something about that. And recognize that the existing land pattern speaks differently than the text in that case.
Great, thank you. Any more comments? All right, so I'm gonna close the public workshop portion of this ordinance, and I'm gonna look to the committee to have a conversation about how we feel about the way it was presented to us and what things we support or questions that we have.
I'm sorry, could I chime in before you close it? I know you just closed it, but.
I'll allow it, come on up.
Thank you. Hannah Maynard, 80 Roxbury Street, Keene. It occurs to me that maybe something to consider to sort of find a medium ground would be to go through with the proposal, but with the stipulation that you couldn't change the footprint of the dwelling, and that would allow, you know, someone who wanted to put a, you know, in-law suite in their attic, or, you know, do something on a very small scale, that could actually have a big impact when you spread it out all over the city, and that it would be very incremental, because most property owners, you know, that's a big undertaking for them still, financially and time and energy, to make that happen, and that it wouldn't be this, you know, proliferation of, you know, all of a sudden, all these multifamily homes in neighborhoods that are used to having single-family environment. But that could be some relief to people who are looking for spaces for multi-generational living, and that sort of thing, that would, you know, extend to, you know, two-family homes being in historic districts, still giving us the look and the feel of the city that we want, that most of us want, but just incrementally building that housing need that obviously we all know we have.
Great.
So that's it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so before we get too deep into it, I just want to check with Mary on the conversation that's been brought up in regards to the historic district. It's my understanding that any additional buildings or changes that were made in the historic district would meet some sort of historic district guideline? Is that correct?
That was true in the past with the land development code, new construction. So if it's like a brand new building that's a freestanding building in the historic district, does not have to go through historic district review. If it's new construction that's attached to an existing structure, then it would. So it's sort of, basically additions have to go through the review process, but a new standing structure would not.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It does. So I think that that might be a way for us to clean up some of the concern for the downtown transition, is to require that it be attached like the other zoning districts.
Yeah, we could certainly either say that for downtown transition, it could require only one primary use. It could be similar to the residential districts in that basically could only have one structure per lot. The other idea that I heard was limiting the number of units. I just did a really rough and quick review of the data for this district, and I think it's about 20% of the lots in the district have more than 3 units that are residential. So getting rid of the density factor, but then including a limit of a max of 3 units or 4 units would probably be reasonable for this district. I don't know.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak up?
I just want to add really quick in regards to the historic district. The demolition of any building considered a contributing or primary within the district is severely limited. So the chance, and would require an applicant going to the Historic District Commission and getting providing an extraordinary reason for why the demolition of a contributing or primary resource is necessary. So the idea of just hypothetically a property developer coming into the historic district, snapping up historic character defining homes, knocking them down and putting up large apartment buildings, there are significant barriers in place for that kind of behavior.
Okay, great. Counselor Williams?
Yeah, I just want to say, with regards to whether to limit it in the transition district or not, we've really made an effort in this council to make sure that the burden of increasing density is spread out across all of the city so that no one neighborhood gets the brunt of it. In particular, we recently went from a 5-acre minimum to a 2-acre minimum in the rural area. Lots of people in the rural area were pretty upset about that, but we recognize that, we do have a need for housing. And so we've increased housing, we've increased densities, pretty much everywhere, and this is more of an effort to do that. And I think, in the interest of fairness, all of the city needs to be ready to accept some increased population, increased density. And we want to avoid concentrating it necessarily in any one place that would put an undue burden on any one neighborhood. But to do that, we've got to make sure that every neighborhood plays its part.
Great, thank you, Counselor Williams, for bringing that up. I was thinking about that as we were talking about this evening. When we were having those conversations, the residents of those neighborhoods were asking us to look at the downtown and try to concentrate our development there because that's where our infrastructure is and that's where our services are. And I think that each part of our city has a responsibility to play in this process of relieving some of the strain and the stress of the housing crisis that we've been experiencing since COVID. And I don't see that this is going to have people beating down our doors to add apartments for relatives in the attic space, because we've already passed an ordinance that allows people to do that by right, so they don't need this ordinance to do that. Our ADU ordinance allows folks to have multi-generational living on their lot. And so we don't need this to do that. What this is hopefully going to do is provide housing for our working class families in our community, and I think that's really needed right now. I am open to the idea of, in the transition district, making them attached. I think I don't think we need to make that transition district any different than it has been in the past, as far as its, the number of units that have been limited there. But if we have the renovations be attached, then it resolves the historic component issue, and I think it just alleviates, I don't see a lot of lots there where they're gonna be allowed to build detached structures anyway. So I think it just benefits that district and the historic component of it. Mayor?
I think you've just made a convincing argument that I wanted to make sure we were identifying the kinds of housing that are involved in this in the increment of of conforming uses. And I think that by staying within the footprint as it exists, begins to sweep in the more of the housing in these districts into conforming use. We can all envision where single-family homes have been converted to two-family homes, where two-family homes have been converted to multifamily housing. It is seeming to me in this definition that while staying within the existing footprint of properties, that we're bringing more of those properties in these districts, those zoning districts, into conforming use. That's an advantage because it puts everybody on an equal ground, articulates proper use within these zones. So I think that this is moving us into a direction that is valuable for future planning within the city.
Yes, and when you take a use that's non-conforming and you make it conforming, it allows that property owner to have access to more opportunities to make changes and build on their own property. Is that correct? Yes, so non-conforming uses are very limited, and we have so many of them in these districts, which is surprising to me. I was not expecting to see that in your graphs, so I'm glad that you included that. And so making those uses conforming gives those property owners rights back that they did not have before. So I think that that is helpful in these changes. Okay, Counselor Haas?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I've got three questions or statements. The fact that if the lot sizes were to remain at 8,000 square feet and this requirement for additional square footage to the lot upon adding additional living units, if we take out this requirement to add the additional square footage to the lot, suddenly we drive another 30% of the existing buildings into conformity. So I take that to mean that they're out of they're non-conforming now because of the number of living units in each building.
Correct.
Does that sound correct?
That's correct for the lot size that they're
Okay,
currently.
so it's
Yes.
not a matter of setbacks or building footprint or height or anything like that. It's a matter of number of living units.
Mary, one second.
Just to clarify, so that is based purely on looking at the lot area and the number of units. It does not take into account setbacks or anything like that, because for each individual lot, I don't know, where they're on the lot with respect to the setbacks and all of that.
Right.
There are a number of lots in each zoning district that will remain non-conforming even if they're vacant, just because they're below the minimum lot size.
For a single unit.
Yeah, for a single unit or just in general, like they're under 8,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet in high density. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
But
Counselor Haas?
That's the existing situation, so removing this requirement to add doesn't really change that at all, just brings those into conformity.
Yes.
Second is, I think we might be talking about different footprints. I think you made the point about the building footprint versus the property footprint. So, you know, the property footprint is defined by the setbacks that are there now, and I'm sorry, the building footprint is defined by the setbacks that are there now in the code, and that won't change. So we're still going to have the same requirement for building footprints, although someone who is within, tighter on their lot could utilize the space out to the available footprint. And then the third point that I was going to make is that would be no different from someone coming in and knocking the building down and building what they could be permitted to build now within the required setbacks and shape and height and such. So I think this is a good requirement to pull out and get rid of, that we don't have to ask for this. But I also think it's not going to make that much of a difference as far as how we see the buildings as they are now and as how they're occupied. There'll be more living units, but the look and the shape and the form of the neighborhoods should not change that much. Thank you.
Great. Yes, Counselor Jones.
Just so you know, Mr. Remy is now on, and you have to announce him and
Oh, thank you.
make it.
Did he just join? I missed him joining. Counselor Remy, are you there?
No, I've been listening to this topic since. Hey, how's it going? I've been listening to this topic since the beginning, but I've been hiding out back here. So
Okay.
I am here. I don't know if you have enough spots for me to be a voting member. I don't know what the quorum is in the room, but I am present. I am in a warehouse in California. I am not alone. So just all those things I normally have to say when I'm joining a meeting.
Yes, so before you joined, I did not have any objections, and we let the board know that you were potentially going to be joining us at some point, so welcome. I'm glad that you were able to hear that part of the conversation. Counselor Remy joining us does mean that the planning board does have to follow the rules, and the full committee would if we were voting together, but you will have to follow the rules of having roll call votes.
Sorry, everybody.
That's
That's
okay.
okay.
So, and there is space for you to be a voting member, I believe? Yes. Okay, so do you have any comments on this, Counselor? I can't see you, if you would like to speak.
No, if it's okay, I'll chime in if I have questions throughout, but I do not have any topics on this one. I think it's a great idea. I think Councilor Williams had some good points around, we got to make sure we're sharing the pain of change. And I think this is something where I don't know that we're going to have a groundswell of hundreds of these, but I hope we have a couple. So anything we can do, it's a drip. So
Great, thank you. So, I think I'm hearing consensus around this getting to a public hearing. Are we comfortable making a vote to move this forward? Mary?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I just wanted to, I'm not sure if this would be helpful, but listening to your conversation about the building footprint versus the property footprint, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. Is it all right if I share my screen really quick? There's what am I trying to say? A graphic in the land development code that might be helpful here. So this is showing, these dotted lines are showing the outline of different parcels. This sort of hatched area is a parking area, and then these sort of square ones are the building footprints. So I think what I understood from the member of the public who was speaking about the building footprint is her recommendation or her suggestion was that folks would be limited to staying within the existing building footprint, which is what my cursor is sort of outlining right now. That's how I understood what she was saying.
I understand that, but I think what the committee is saying is that as long as it's attached, it's allowed. And it
Okay.
meets the other guidelines by code, setbacks and non-pervious surface, et cetera.
Okay. So if that's the consensus of the committee, that works. If you wanted to limit it to the building footprint, we would have to,
I understand.
yeah, okay, great.
Thanks. All right.
Yeah,
Mayor?
yeah, just want to understand a couple of comments. One of which was, as a conforming use, should a building move from non-conforming to conforming, that this would ease the process of adding to the footprint so long as it met other qualifications. Is that correct?
So if you have and Mary, just tune this up as I go. If you have a non-conforming use in the city, it limits your ability to get a building permit for certain changes.
For certain things, yes. So like, for example, if you have a substandard lot, a lot that's only 4,000 square feet where you need at least 6,000 square feet, you wouldn't be able to necessarily build on that without getting relief from zoning.
Right.
Now, if you have an already existing legally non-conforming structure or use, our ordinance does allow under certain circumstances for you to expand that. But it's only to a certain extent, and the expansion has to comply with the setbacks. So it's not always possible in every situation for that to occur.
So if you had a non-conforming use and you wanted to add a sunroom, you potentially could not add that sunroom because you're in a non-conforming lot.
You could expand it a certain amount as long as the expansion conformed with all of the setbacks. It's confusing.
It is confusing.
Yeah.
So it takes away some of that weird gray area by allowing some of these non-conforming lots to become conforming.
With that for sure.
Yes.
I was just trying to understand the attached versus existing footprint.
So I'll try to explain that. So if you have an existing footprint of a home on a lot, this ordinance would not bar you from adding an addition to add a third unit. So you could add an addition to the back of the lot, or to the back of your current building, or to the side of your current building, to add additional units, which would change the footprint of your home. It would, but you would still be constrained by other code, such as setbacks to the property lines, impervious surfaces, parking restrictions, that sort of thing. So this would not be carte blanche for people to just build to the edges of their lots and add all of these units. There would still be constraints in place. The constraint wouldn't be the underlying lot size. It would be other pieces of code that would be constraining the number of units that you'd be allowed. Does that make sense?
Although the lot size could be a constraining.
It is certainly now.
So long as you met that minimum lot size, which is
Underlying.
already in,
Yes.
the 6,000 or 8,000 square feet.
Correct.
Follow all the other setback parking restrictions. An attachment onto the existing footprint would be a conforming use.
Correct. And previous to this conversation, a detached unit would be a conforming use in transition, but I think that what we're asking is that we restrict that to also attached structure, which gives some historic district protections to those changes.
That sounds consistent with some of the input that we were receiving
Yes,
from others tonight, right?
I think so.
I think so.
We good? All right. I'm ready for a motion on the PLD side. Counselor Jones? Oh, you want the planning to go first? Okay. All right, you're up, Mary.
Okay. So I would like to ask for a motion to say that this ordinance is in alignment with the 2010 master plan.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
I'll second.
Oh, all right. I guess it meant I made the motion. Okay. That's what I meant to say,
Okay,
apparently.
and roll call?
excuse me one sec, I have to pull it up. Also, Did the committee, and I apologize, we were chatting about how to accomplish what you'd like to do, but did the committee vote on creating an A version of the ordinance, or do you want to move it forward as is?
So do you want to make that one amendment change and make it an A?
Yeah, I think that would be creating an A version, and then the next decision would be, do you want us to bring it back to you at the workshop phase so that you have a chance to review it before sending it forward for a public hearing, or not?
Well,
We're-
let's get through the A version, and then we
Okay.
can have that conversation. I don't know that that change will require another workshop.
Okay.
I would make the motion to amend the current ordinance to an A version that allows for the change of structures in the downtown transition to be required to be attached.
Second?
Motion made and seconded by Counselor Jones. Any questions on that motion? We're going to do a roll call because we have Counselor Remy on board. Mary?
Yes. For PLD, Kate Bosley,
Yes.
Phil Jones,
Yes.
Bobby Williams,
Yes.
Ed Haas,
Yes.
Andrew Madison. And for Planning Board, Harold Farrington,
Yes.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Yes.
Mayor Jay Khan,
Yes.
Counselor Mike Remy,
Yes.
Armando Rangel,
Yes.
and Randon Markelon.
Yes. Great, that's unanimous. Unless there's any objection, I don't think that needs to go through another workshop. I think we've workshopped it here on the floor tonight.
Okay.
All right, so we're back to the planning board.
Start
session.
over, all right. So I would like to propose a motion that this A version of the ordinance does conform with the 2010 master plan.
I'd like to second that.
All right, so roll call vote for the Planning Board, Harold Farrington,
Yes.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Yes.
Mayor Jay Khan,
Yes.
Counselor Mike Remy,
Yes.
Armando Rangel,
Yes.
and Randon Markelon.
Yes. Great, that is unanimous. Counselor Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that the planning board, the PLD committee recommend that this mayor set a public hearing.
I have a motion by Counselor Jones, seconded by Counselor Williams. Any questions on that motion? Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous. All right, so that will have a public hearing at full council. If there's any additional comments that want to be made before this goes back to PLD for continued conversation, and then the council will make a vote on that. So there are some more steps for public input if anyone has any additional things that they'd like to add. Our public workshop B tonight is ordinance O-2024-19 relative to building heights in the Commerce District. Petitioner City of Keens Community Development Department proposes to amend section 5.1.4 of the Land Development Code, the LDC, to modify the allowed height within the Commerce District to be 3 stories or 42 feet, and amend section 8.3.1 of the LDC to incentivize residential development in the Commerce District by permitting height of up to 6 stories or 82 feet for dwelling multifamily with limitations. Evan, are you presenting for us tonight?
I am.
Wonderful. Join us up at the table.
So I do apologize, I don't have a slideshow this evening.
That's okay.
So I'm going to briefly talk about what is currently allowed in regards to height in the Commerce District, how we're proposing to change that, and then some of the rationalization for what we're hoping to see this change achieve. So currently, originally, I should say, before the Land Development Code was adopted, in the Commerce District, 2 stories or 35 feet was allowed by right in the Commerce District, and that was more or less, that was it. With the adoption of the Land Development Code, Some additional height allowances were granted within the district with certain conditions and limitations. And how it's currently written is you're allowed 2 stories or 35 feet just by right. You can go up to 3 stories or 42 feet with the additional 10-foot front and side building setbacks, or a building height step back of at least 10 feet. And the step back must occur above the ground floor. So a building setback is your basic dimensional limitations on a lot. You've got a front yard setback, side yard setbacks, and rear yard setback. A building step back is that sort of staircase effect you see in some buildings. A building will go up maybe like 1 or 2 stories, and then the 3rd story will be offset farther away from the front of the primary facade of the building. That's a step back. And it's kind of an architectural technique that reduces the looming intensity of a large building. So then again, up to 4 stories or 56 feet with a greater building setback or step back that's increased to 20 feet from 10 feet. The proposal is to increase the number of stories by right up to 3 stories or 42 feet just across the board. So any permitted use within the Commerce District will now be able to go up to 3 stories. We then changed by amending the use standard, which is in Article 8 of the Land Development Code, to carve out additional height allowances for multifamily residential. We already allow multifamily residential in the Commerce District with the caveat that the dwelling units have to be above the ground floor. So that's kind of acknowledging that the Commerce District is still for commercial activity, and we do want to see not just residential uses in this district. We also want to see some kind of commercial activity. It's worth noting that after that change that I described earlier and what is currently on the books has never been taken advantage of in the almost 3 years that it's been allowed. Nobody's come in saying, I want to build extra tall in the Commerce District, and I'm willing to work within these constraints. So we're going to allow, the proposal allows up to 3 stories, and then up to 6 for multifamily residential. We still want to see some kind of commercial activity in that development form. However, as opposed to the entire ground floor being commercial, we've sort of specified that the front part of that project needs to be tenantable commercial space, which is, we want commercial activity in that space, but we also want to supply flexibility to a potential developer to kind of define what that is. In a lot of cases with larger scale development, developers have end users in mind. So they have some general idea of the square footage that they're looking for. So they should be able to slot that in and then be able to add additional dwellings sort of behind that tenantable commercial space. They can also choose to do parking if they so choose. The constraints for this 6-story or 82-foot residential project is including that step back of only 15 feet. That's a minimum. So if the architect feels that greater than 15 feet for the step back is more appropriate, they're certainly allowed to do that. It just has to be at least 15 feet. And then we're also making it location specific. So if this parcel is adjacent to a residential use, that increases the building setback to 50 feet from that shared property line. So that's something that is new in our code. Currently, we have certain restrictions that are related to properties that are adjacent to a residential zoning district. However, we wanted to be, or staff, I should say, wanted to be a little more conscientious, I think that's the right word, or aware of, there are residential uses within the Commerce District. There are whole neighborhoods of residential uses in the Commerce District, and we don't want to be inadvertently overwhelming those, in many cases, single-family residences with very tall apartment buildings. And so we wanted to provide some additional protection to those situations by separating with additional distance. So that's what we're proposing to do. I talked about where we came from. This is kind of what we're hoping to see. In the same vein that many members of the community have talked about densifying downtown, we want to see the most intense, the tallest buildings in downtown. There's only so much development potential available in downtown. We've got existing historic buildings that are at their structural limits. Going taller is just not feasible. We've got certain areas in the downtown with some limited opportunity that city staff is constantly trying to activate. But there are also parts of the urban compact that may be appropriate for taller, more intense development for residential. And while there's no density limit in many of our mixed-use districts that are just simply written, there are other limitations within the zoning ordinance that create density limits, and height is one of them. And it's pretty simple when you start thinking about making a project pencil out. How many units do I need to build at my construction cost, at my land acquisition cost, to make this project viable? And then I need to go out and find money, right? And I need to convince investors that my building is a better investment than the S&P 500. And right now, that is a very hard argument for developers to make. The return on new construction is not very high right now. So allowing height with limitations just creates more opportunity. The last thing I'll say is we hear a lot about there not being a lot of available commercial space in the city at a rate that the commercial market in the city will tolerate. The price per square foot for new commercial is, the last I was told, was about $25 per square foot, which is much greater than the current market load for commercial space. Tenants just can't afford to pay that price. So existing commercial space is less than that. So there's almost a give and take with increased height. A greater amount of residential units will actually sort of offset that cost for new commercial space as well. So we might actually not only get more housing units, create more commercial spaces for businesses and small businesses and local enterprises to stay in town or start in town that might not currently be able to, because we're sort of at this kind of weird nexus of not being able to marketably create new commercial space without it being subsidized. So,
Great. Thank you.
you're welcome.
So does this ordinance affect commercial LTD?
No, it is purely the Commerce District.
Oh, I'm sorry, commerce, okay. Do we have any questions for staff before we open it up to the public? Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think I got three. The first, I heard you say parking is an allowable first floor use, and I just wanted to clarify that when we define commerce, is parking a part of commerce? Because that's what this says. It says commercial use, sorry, it says commercial space,
So,
tenantable commercial space. And just want to make sure that parking is included, or does it need to be explicitly stated?
so,
But parking, would that be considered tenant?
it would not be considered tenantable
Tenantable.
commercial space. As is allowed now, it's a very good point, Mr. Mayor, thank you. To have the 6 stories, you would have to provide the tenantable commercial space. That's sort of the trade-off on that ground floor. That doesn't mean you couldn't do parking behind it instead of additional residential. By right, we have a limitation in the Commerce District that says you can't have residential on the ground floor. With this change, you could do parking on your ground floor and then 2 stories of residential above it. But if you
So long
want,
as there was commercial to the street?
without the commercial to the street, it could be entirely parking on the first floor, and then you'd be able to go up 2 stories of residential.
But you would not be able to go up.
But you would not be able to
6.
go up to 6. If you wanted 6, you had to do the tenantable commercial space on the ground floor. And then it would be the developer's choice what they did with the rest of the ground floor.
But I guess we could make that change.
You could.
And the reason I'm saying this, we've all seen, I'm sure in other cities and including New Hampshire, where ground levels and perhaps second level on a 6-story building would be parking space. So I'd hate, personally, I'd hate to see us foreclose that option for the height limitation that we're trying to achieve.
Mhm.
All right, I'll leave that there for a second.
Okay.
The second thing about the 15-foot setback from the commercial space or commercial and parking space, is there some other tolerance that says if I'm a designer and maybe I want a greater setback than 15 feet for the entire building? Maybe it makes most sense if I'm building up to stay within one common footprint all the way. If I have that insight and desire, is there a different setback than 15 feet that is the guidance for that builder?
Absolutely. So instead of the building step back, which is that staircase, they could instead choose just an additional building setback. So just like you said, so instead of doing the terraced approach, they could just take the entire building and push it back that additional 15 feet, and then they could go flush all the way up.
So that would be a 30-foot setback from the curb or from the lot? I don't know, from some measurement.
There would definitely be some measurement.
So yeah, the standard front setback is 20 feet.
Thank you, Mary.
So it'd be 35 feet.
So it'd be 35 feet, and then they could go straight up six stories.
35 feet, as opposed to 15.
So it's an additional 15.
Additional 15 on top of a setback requirement of 20.
20.
Correct.
Okay. And just so everybody's got the same visual, if this was, for instance, a recreational facility, it would make very little sense to step back. It would be a commercial use, and it may go up multiple stories, but it may make no sense to try to step it back and still have the same volume through the space, just to give you a visual.
Yeah, kind of like what the Colonial Theater needed, right? They needed that additional headroom for their stage and the equipment and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Except I think we're talking about residential applications and not commercial
And there could be,
applications.
but there could be residential above that
Above the
recreational.
underneath, I see what
Yeah,
you're saying.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I also just want to make a clarifying point, because I heard Evan say this earlier, I made a mental note of it, but you said that the step back had to be above the first floor, but it is required to be above the third floor. So you could have the first 3 floors, is that correct? At the 20-foot setback, and then the step back would occur at the 3rd floor?
Correct. So
Which would
if,
resolve that issue as well.
yeah, if a designer so chose, and they wanted to utilize the step back, it has to happen, I believe, before the 4th floor of the building. So you could do 3 stories at 20 feet,
At one,
and
And
then
then
story
step back.
4 through 6 would be, have that 15-foot offset.
which gives you some more movement and like design ideas.
Yeah, so flexibility is definitely important. I think that staff that's something that we're really learning in general, is the fewer caveats and the fewer forced design decisions in the code, the better. There's a lot of unintended side effects with those limitations.
And just so that I walk away from this conversation really clear on the parking aspect, we would need to include something to make the parking commercial space in a building.
As written, or as proposed, I should say, with a 6-story multifamily building, a developer would be able to come in, propose, let's say like a tenantable commercial space that's maybe like 20 feet deep into the building. And then they would be allowed to put parking in the remaining like 30 or 40 feet of depth on that ground floor as proposed. And then they could go residential all the way up.
Or we could propose a definition of ground level requirement that would include parking or tenantable space.
Well, I think it's written that way currently. If you're asking if we would consider a change to remove the tenantable space and have it be 100% parking, is that what you're,
That it could be an either or.
that it could be an either or? I think that the question before we get that far for me is I would like to see maps. I'm looking at maps here, but I don't know that the rest of the committee is looking at maps. If we could potentially get a map up here, because I don't know if everyone understands the streets we're talking about. But I think that what we need to discuss in that vein is, and we talked a lot about this downtown this design is reminiscent of the design that's in the LDC for our downtown area. And we talked about what the feel and the walkability of downtown space and how you want things built to the edge of the lots. And we actually don't allow people to set back in certain areas because we want the space to feel walkable. And so in this instance, it's similar to me. I'd have to look at the maps with the group and we could discuss, is it create a negative burden on the community to have parking on some of these streets on the first level, or do you want that commercial facade? Is it, I don't know if the word I'm using is correct, but does it detract from that area to have potentially these parking garages on the first floor at the eye level of the people that are using that area? Or do you want to have, for continuity, some commercial storefront view? Because what we're talking about is changing the look and feel of some of these streets. So for instance, like, and it's give and take for me. So like, for instance, on Avon Street, I would not probably care if you had tenantable commercial space. But if you're on West Street, it might feel different to have a parking garage sitting right on West Street. And you might want that to be a commercial facade. That's a conversation we need to have. I don't know how I feel about it quite yet. I'd like to hear input. Mary?
Thank you, Madam Madam Chair, excuse me. Just one thing I'd like to add to this conversation, echoing something that Mr. Clement said earlier. We have been hearing from a lot of businesses in the city that are either expanding or they're moving from their current location because they've been leasing that space for 30 years and all of a sudden the owner needs it for something else, whatever. And there's a lot of businesses that have been in Keene for a very long time who are trying to stay in the city and are really struggling to find a place to go. So one of the things we wanted to be sensitive to with this proposed ordinance was to not, like right now, as Evan mentioned, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of value in residential development compared to commercial development. So we didn't want to allow multifamily residential in the commercial district in a way that it could sort of take over all the commercial property. Like, we only have certain areas in the city where commercial uses are allowed. And if we, I guess my concern with just allowing housing to happen on commercial properties is that then we would see,
Commercial properties be torn down for housing structures.
yes, and there's already such like a pent-up demand for, especially that smaller sort of like, I would say like small to mid-size business range. So the tenantable space is something that we took from, in the land development code, there's standards for parking structures. I'm not sure if anyone's ever seen this in other cities, but the standards for building a parking garage now, in many places, from the street level, it looks like there's just a normal street lined with shops and you can do window shopping and whatever. But really, it's a big parking garage. Those shops only go like 15 to 30 feet deep, and then it's all parking behind them. That's kind of what we were envisioning with the whole tenantable space. So it still preserves that, the feel of the commerce district, but allows for that parking behind it. That being said, I just wanted to explain where we were coming from with that proposal and what we were kind of like envisioning with it. Yeah.
And I can envision that. I've actually been party to designing something like that. But I've also been party to designs in a downtown district that allow for parking on the ground 2 floors. And as you say, it can have a whole lot of different feels. I just wonder how much we want to get in the way between a developer and their ability to maximize the benefit of their space. And that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a great conversation because when we think about this, and this is not the district we're talking about, and I don't want to confuse things, but I think about it a lot in the terms of Gilboa Ave and what might happen there. And, you know, I would hate to see the ground floor of Gilboa Ave as a parking garage. You know, that would be a huge loss to our community for me. I hope someday for Main Street to the Colony Mill to feel super connected and walkable, and for that whole area to develop in a way that feels like a walkable part of our community. And people will just, you know, we saw this, we did a study that I went to, there was about a walkable downtown, it was at the library, and there was a gentleman, an expert that wrote a book on this, and he came in and he spoke to us, and he talked about our Main Street, and he spent some time observing it, and he said, you know where the life stops on your Main Street? It's where, he didn't know the business, but it's where the Athens parking lot begins, because the building is not built to the sidewalk. And he said it gets a design flaw, and people don't walk down past parking lots. They look, and it's like, okay, we're just not going to access this part of the street because we're not doing the window shopping and seeing the hustling and the bustling going on. And it's true, and I've observed it. And when we had the cobblestone building, people would walk down to that building past that parking lot, but now no one walks past that parking lot. So I think to have a street lined with parking garages might, on the first floor, to me feels like we just need to understand that is a consequence, or I don't want it to be an unintended consequence of a decision we make here. I want it to be a thoughtful decision that we're making relative to what we want to see in this district. It might be appropriate for this district, but I also hear what Mary's saying, that we also don't want to cancel out the commercial space that we do have by people who are trying to make more money by building residential. And then we reduce the opportunity for our businesses to be able to remain here because we don't have a lot of space for them.
Yeah,
You know, like, that's a,
We'll
it's a
continue to
juggling-
talk about it,
yeah.
as you said, but just to take a pizza
Yes,
parlor on Main Street, and that has parking near it and on its property. And this is where the definition of mixed-use development needs to have some context here. And mixed-use development may include all the above. It may include parking, and it may include commercial space, and it may include up above residential space. And I think that really gives us that ability to maximize everything on a parcel without giving up. So that's enough. I don't need to have any more conversation on it, but I think you got the idea. I think mixed-use definitions that allow owners to understand our desire for commercial parking and residential space in the downtown area are all important.
agree. Counselor Haas?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify that we're only talking about the Commerce District, not the downtown areas. I agree with the mayor on the downtown areas, that we should be flexible there, but I love the idea of requiring the commercial on the first floor, and that's what I've seen over time with residential developments, that they will always make the first floor, they'll take that piece of the parking garage and make it commercial. Because the first floor of a parking garage is somewhat used for ramps in and out anyhow, and for building utilities. So to have a hunk of it for small commercial, and it also benefits the idea of small commercial spots, which are much more usable than any large commercials. So I love the idea of having that in place. Just talking about the sizes of the buildings, and maybe, Evan, you might tell us, I'm just looking at the courtyard, that's 5 stories high. Colony Mill is like 4.5, 5 stories, depending on how you count the first floor. Do you know the heights of those buildings offhand? Are they 12-foot floors, 10-foot floors? I suspect courtyard is a 10-foot floor.
Yeah, that sounds about right. When we were looking at different heights, we were very much working with our building team and Mike Hagan, our plans examiner, to kind of come up with an average and what is sort of the standard for floor height. So about 10 feet, about 8 to 10 feet per floor. So yeah, the Colony Mill might actually be a little bit taller, just considering its previous use.
I think that's somewhat of old school residential, as 8 to 10 foot high floors. You're going to get more into the 12-foot area with modern buildings. So
Yeah, especially with like
that's why we
HVAC
gotta
and stuff
go
like
to
that.
82 feet or whatever you worked it out to.
Yep.
So, just to visualize how big a building is. But again, in the Commerce District, these could be very appropriate. They might start to develop an island of growth around them as well, so. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Counselor Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up with staff because you made a good point talking about Gilboa Avenue and such. And is there a way around that? I think there are times when you don't want that parking on the, can we write it that way? Can
It
we
is
pick
written
and
that way.
choose where we want that parking and where we
Oh,
don't?
on different streets?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it, Mary.
So this ordinance is specific to the Commerce District. So this would allow, although it doesn't talk specifically about parking on the ground floor, it would be allowed. In the downtown districts, we have pretty specific regulations around parking. So the Gilboa Avenue area up to, up to, I believe, School Street is all in the either downtown growth or the very first part of it is in downtown core. So they would have to comply with the form-based code standards. So yeah, parking isn't allowed on the ground floor there today. Outside of the downtown districts, parking on the ground floor, I believe, is allowed. And I think in some districts, it's actually, if you do parking on the ground floor, you can go up an extra story. So it's incentivized in some areas.
Yeah, and then the planning board, the site plan regulations also have some, for outside of the downtown core districts, have some regulations about the required on-street parking can't be in front of the building without a waiver and things like that. And then there's screening and landscaping standards as well to kind of soften the sea of pavement effect.
Okay. Anyone from this side? I think we're still in the question phase. I know it feels like deliberation, but we have not, I do want to hear from the public too. Okay.
Okay, I will get out of the way.
So at this point, while this is not a formal public hearing, I'd like to invite members of the public to offer comments or questions on the proposed ordinance.
Madam Chair, probably about an hour ago, you did mention something about the difficulties that, some of our regulations are creating, right? And I've been working right now with two specific projects that are outside of the Commerce District. They're actually in the downtown, where the regulations have probably killed the projects. And I will be talking to Mary and others about that and what we can do to make those things more amenable. Everything you put in, restrictor-wise, makes it a little bit harder sometimes to do things, right? In this case, what we're doing is we're actually opening the door for more opportunity for a specific purpose, which is for housing and things like that. The parking will come into consideration. They'll have to address parking as part of their plan and part of their pro forma, right? But I think if you keep in mind that the more opportunity we give people, a designer, direction, without being locked in, the more we'll see actual development.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on this tonight?
Was not planning to speak on this, didn't even know it was here, but I lived in New York City for a long time.
I'm sorry, just name and address
Oh,
again.
sorry, Hannah Maynard, 80 Roxbury Street. I lived in New York City for a long time, so I think I can speak to the feel of tall buildings. And it's actually something that I would welcome downtown, and I think that parking is always not pretty, and it's always something that you need, so you have to find the middle ground. And I like the idea of keeping the tenable space in there, but, to someone's point that it could be very, very small, could be 20 feet deep. And I think that actually probably a lot of retailers can't afford big spaces right now because they're competing with everyone online. And that might add something, another element of walkability to the city. And honestly, if you have something to look at ground level, it doesn't matter what's up there. And it actually kind of feels kind of cozy and robust, that you're part of a city that has a lot going on, and the parking could be hidden, I would say, for the most part. But it does affect the walkability, for sure, especially, having small children and big groups of people always wondering, is a car coming out? Are we safe here? That's something certainly to consider, but you have to be able to park somewhere. And I don't think that that's some limitation that we should put on developers that should be included. But also, it would be nice to have retail spaces as well. That's it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? All right, I'm going to close the public portion of our workshop this evening, and I'm going to go back to the board. I think we've had some ideas that have gotten floated, and I'm going to let everybody digest it, and I'm interested to see if we like the ordinance the way it's written, if there's concerns about it, or if we want to make any amendments. Counselor Jones.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start off. Members of these boards have heard me talk a number of times about smart growth principles. I've always been an advocate of smart growth principles. It's something that is referenced in our present master plan. I've critiqued other zoning changes saying they don't meet smart growth principles. This certainly does. And for that reason, I like it. I also like the fact that it helps incentivize by creating a return on the investment for builders. And also, if we're going up 82 feet, that's gonna incentivize more of electronic infrastructure put on top of these buildings, which brings an assessed value. Sometimes it's 30% of the building. It's very high-priced stuff. So it's gonna help with our taxes also. So I think there's a couple benefits to this.
Yes, that
To
was
this
not
ordinance.
lost on me as well. Counselor Williams?
One thing I really like about this is that it allows residential on the ground floor of a commercial, and I like having the storefronts up front for sure. But I like having residential on the ground floor because those are apartments that can be accessed in a wheelchair. You know, if you're ground floor, you know, you don't have to deal with stairs. If it can be on the ground floor and you don't have to install an elevator, like that's a huge savings. So it just makes disabled access apartments much easier to build, and I appreciate that.
Great, thank you, Counselor. Counselor Haas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll follow on. I think this is great. I like that it's focused on Commerce District, and if we can see one or two or three of these pop up somewheres, that would create a growth effect right in that immediate area, I hope. Thank you.
Great. How are you guys feeling over here? Good? Harold?
Yeah, I certainly agree that that seems like a smart approach to addressing some of our housing requirements. If even if just a couple of these can be put together, that makes sense to a developer. I think that would go a long way. Yep.
Great. So I'm hearing consensus around everyone liking the way that the staff brought forward the language in the ordinance. So, Mayor, did you want to offer any amendments, or are you comfortable with the way it's written?
Yeah, so let me see if there's any greater acceptance, because I think I...
Can you turn on your microphone, please?
So
Thank you.
sorry.
So I hear there's some acceptance to the way the staff has designed it, written it, but I want to give us enough of an image of it, because I continue to think that there are potential ground use spaces, uses for parking purposes. And it's good to look at Gilbo as an example, but whoever does something on Gilbo is likely to be also doing something on School Street. So it's not just the one street, and this says on the street level. And so you could have that parking back behind 20 feet of commercial space on Gilbo, but this language is closing out the possibility of having parking that faces onto School Street because it says street. So I again will come back and say, I think that I just want us to tune it up so that developers don't feel so constrained that all they have is a driveway chute coming down from, you know, up above, parking at a second or third level.
So the ordinance also doesn't prohibit on-site parking that's behind the building.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to have underground or one level of, it could be residential all the way to the, which I think Councilor Williams spoke to a little bit. It could be residential all the way to the first floor with a commercial facade, and parking could be behind the building. I think my concern, and I think I confused things by including Gilbo Ave in part of this conversation, and Gilbo does sort of abut and turn the corner at commercial, but the lots that are prime for development on Gilbo are not in this district. So they fall under a different set of rules anyway.
That's good.
However, the lots that would be impacted are all of West Street, Key Road, Ashbrook, and then a lot of residential looking streets like Richardson Court and Pearl Street and Avon Street. So I think that, I think personally, I like having there be a requirement that some commercial space be allowed. And some of it is visual for me, but also here, I hear that I don't want to wipe out our commercial zone and make it a residential zone because there is a, as a developer, you're weighing your costs here, right? Like, does it make sense to build a commercial building in this market? No, it does not. Does it make sense to build a residential building in this market that's 3 stories tall? No, it does not, because we offered it and no one did it. So now we're saying, okay, what about building a residential building that's 6 stories tall? Does that get you enough units to offset the cost of doing this project? And hopefully the answer here is yes, and we'll see a couple of these happen. But at some point, when you've tipped the scales so heavily on waiting that residential is going to pay for this project to be viable, you then start to incentivize people to tear down commercial structures that we need to support our businesses locally and replace them with these residential structures. And we spend our entire time in this room weighing out the needs of different types of people. People in the downtown transition neighborhoods, people in the rural neighborhoods, people in our downtown core. And we also have to consider the needs of our commercial constituents. And we don't want to wipe out the commercial zone completely because it's more lucrative to build out residential buildings. And that's my fear, is that if you don't have some sort of collaboration there, that you're going to incentivize people to tear down commercial buildings and just put in parking garages and residential.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So take the West Street and Richardson Court example,
Okay.
which now has a whole bunch of small properties there. So it's truly hypothetical.
Yes,
But
it's
let's
very
take
mixed.
it. This wording in the first paragraph says, the increased height allowance for multifamily dwellings would only be allowed where the ground floor of the building along the street frontage is tenable commercial space.
Okay.
It's on both streets.
So you're talking about a corner lot. I'm saying that somebody would buy someone's building a car wash on West Street right now.
Mm-hmm.
Someone could buy that car wash and tear it down and just build a residential building there.
3 stories.
6 stories. Under this ordinance, they could tear that car wash down. If that car wash was only making them, I don't know, 50 grand a year, let's say, they could make the decision that I'm gonna make there's more profit off the residential application, and I'm gonna start tearing down these commercial structures, or a landlord who can't rent a space. So, like Mr. G's, I don't know what they get for rent on Mr. G's, but that's another prime location where you could tear that building down and you could build a parking garage and 6 stories of residential. I'm 100% sure that they're gonna make more money off from that than they are off from the rent from that one storefront. But what we're doing is we're creating an unintended consequence. At some point, we're gonna have a line of businesses at our door saying, what did you do? You let them tear down or build up all these residential structures on all of the area that you've allowed for us to have a place to go. And now we don't have any more tchotchke shops on West Street, or, discount stores on West Street, or car washes on West Street, because it's all lined with 6-story residential buildings with parking garages on the first floor. And I understand that there's a desire to not, like Med said earlier, to create constraints on designers, but it's also our job to not create laws that have unintended consequences and harm us down the road. So I'm just trying to weigh out, could this potentially, if we don't require some commercial use on site in the commercial district, are we going to be cutting off our nose to spite our face?
I'm objecting to a few words here that I think, again, want to say that there has to be some commercial space on the first floor, that it all has to be commercial space on the first floor as long as it abuts the street.
It doesn't, that is not how I read it.
You know, it's the way I'm reading it.
Can you tell me what line you're on?
Yeah, the fifth line.
Madam Chair, the proposed language in the ordinance is that section 8.3.1, residential uses of Article 8, basically subsection C2, which is where the section is for dwelling multifamily, would have a use standard which states that in the Commerce District, up to 6 stories or 82 feet of height is permitted so long as the ground floor along the street frontage shall be tenantable commercial space. I'm wondering if we could insert a word that would address the mayor's concern instead of just saying along the street frontage, it could say along the primary street frontage. That way for a lot that's on a corner lot, or if it has lots on, or streets on 3 sides.
So I think, and I could be unclear, but are you reading that to say that the entire floor has to be commercial?
No.
Or understanding that?
No, but I'm reading that it says, the building along the street frontage is tenantable commercial space. I agree with what city planner has said. If you make the primary street, that makes it very obvious.
If it's a corner lot?
Addresses both of our concerns.
Yes. I'm
So
fine with
I
that.
would like that amend, I would make the amendment. Do we have a motion on the floor first?
We do not.
So I can only move the planning board's motion, and you already have it. So
Well, no, it's for the full, this is for the full committee. You can make that motion if you'd like. Yep.
Yeah, our motion was was for the previous ordinance.
Right.
This is the first time where we have no motions for this ordinance at this time.
So anyone on the floors has the ability to make a motion to amend the ordinance before we vote on whether or not it complies with the master plan.
So we have a motion.
We do not have a
Don't have a
motion.
motion for approval of the ordinance as presented.
No.
So
So you
I'd
can-
like to make the motion to approve the motion as presented and then make an amendment.
Okay, so you would like to move to amend
Yeah, do it in the
ordinance
other order.
O-2024-19 to an A version to include the language,
Primary
Add the
street,
word
yeah.
primary to the 6th line. 5th line,
Mary, did you get that?
to the primary street frontage.
Mary?
Yes, so we can certainly add the word primary, and if the committee would like, we can also clarify in this that the ground floor can be used for residential or really any other use that's allowed in the district as long as the space, there's the frontage of the building along the primary street frontage, there's tenantable commercial space. So I'm getting nodding heads. Okay.
Yes.
We can
I'll
make
make
that
a
change.
second on the amendment.
Okay. Counselor Williams?
Just a question about that, do we have a definition of primary street frontage?
Yes.
Your address.
Good question. Okay, I think we got to a resolution that hopefully helps make you happy and satisfies my concern as well. I'm comfortable with that. Any questions? We have to do a roll, Counselor Haas?
Sorry, not directly on the amendment. if you
This
don't
is-
mind.
This is on
Thank
the
you.
amendment right now.
Okay,
Only.
I'll hold my question.
Mary, can we call the roll?
Yes, for PLD, Kate Bosley,
Yes.
Phil Jones,
Yes?
Bobby Williams,
Yes.
Ed Haas.
Yes,
For Planning Board, Harold Farrington,
Yes.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Yes.
Mayor Jay Khan,
Yes.
Counselor Mike Remy,
Yes.
Oh, he's still here.
Armando Rangel,
Yes.
and Randon Markelon.
Yes. All right, that is unanimous. All right, so now we have an amended ordinance. Counselor Haas.
Yeah, just a question. Often these buildings are built in a podium style where the first couple floors might all be parking, or with the commercial grade level frontage, and then apartments above. Is there anything here where we're prohibiting parking above the first floor? I don't think there is, but.
No, a parking structure is allowed in this district by right as a principal use.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. I think you're up, Harold.
I would move that, that this amendment, this ordinance as amended, Amendment A, complies with the 2010 master plan.
I'd like to second.
Mary, can you call the roll?
Sorry. Harold Farrington,
Yes.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Yes.
Mayor Jay Khan,
Yes.
Counselor Mike Remy,
Yes.
Armando Rangel,
Yes.
and Randon Markelon.
Yes. That is unanimous. Counselor Jones.
I would move that the PLD recommend that the mayor set a public hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Counselor Williams. All in favor? And that is unanimous. All right, we have made it through 2 workshops tonight. That's 2 hours that you guys have hung out with us. I really appreciate it. We do have one more, a couple more things on our agenda, but they're gonna be quick, I promise. Number 4, you'll see as a highlight, this is the potential sign code modifications. This came out of council, but I think staff has some comments for me on this one.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So in discussing this with the city attorney, he advised that this committee doesn't have jurisdiction over this item yet because it was submitted as a letter requesting an ordinance. The way it's laid out in the regulations is that an ordinance has to be submitted and go to city council for a first reading before it comes to this body. So he recommended that it go back to city council and that it go through the process outlined in the LDC.
Great, and do you think we need a motion for that tonight?
No, I don't believe so.
Do you want to do it just in case?
I mean, sure, you can always do a motion just in case,
Okay.
but feel free, yeah.
Counselor Jones?
Okay, just for everyone's reference, this is a letter from the mayor dated September 30th, asking for a change in the code to permit blade signs in an industrial zone.
That's correct.
So that's what we're talking about, and with that, I would make a motion to, my watch is talking to me. I would make a motion to send this to city council.
I'll second that. We have a motion and second on the floor. Any questions on that motion? I know we went through that kind of fast. Mary, can you call the roll?
Yes, for PLD, Kate Bosley,
Yes.
Phil Jones,
Yes.
Bobby Williams,
Yes.
Ed Haas.
Yes.
For Planning Board, Harold Farrington,
Yes.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Yes.
Mayor Jay Khan,
Yes.
Mike Remy, Counselor Mike Remy,
Yes.
Armando Rangel,
Yes.
and Randon Markelon.
Yes. Great. Do you have any new business tonight?
No, Madam Chair, at least not from staff.
Great. Anyone else want to bring up anything tonight? Counselor Jones?
Yeah, I mentioned the 79E and the TIF district earlier, and that's really not part of this body. That affects the tax rates. That's a city council thing, and it's not something we should be addressing.
Okay.
So I just said it in the wrong place.
No, I think it's totally, I mean, it's appropriate to think about all these things because they do overlap, and hopefully we'll see something back at council, and that is under your purview, so I understand. All right, item 6 is our next meeting, which right now is scheduled for December 9th, 2024. And Saying, with that being said, our meeting is adjourned.